From the Telesur headquarters in Caracas, Venezuela, welcome back to From the South. I am Luis de Jesus. Let's take a look at our headlines. Indigenous coronavirus. And Belarus president announced his willingness to contest a second presidential elections through a popular referendum to amend the constitution. And we'll start now with the news. Stay with us. Dozens of members of Brazil's Kayapo indigenous community have blocked the Trans-Amazonian Highway to protest against deforestation as well as the lack of support provided by the Bolsonaro government to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic. President Bolsonaro recently claimed that it was a lie that fires were ravaging the Amazon rainforest despite data from his own government showing the rising number of blazes. The far-right leader has faced international condemnation for his failure to protect the Amazon from rising deforestation and increased fires. Satellite data from the Brazilian Space Agency shows that the number of forest fires rose 28% in the last year. Experts say the fires are typically not sparked naturally, but intentionally started to illegally clear land for farming and ranching. And rural workers in the Altiplano region of Guatemala have denounced violent acts against indigenous and rural communities. The rural workers committee of the Altiplano denounced the lack of interest on the part of the authorities in clarifying the murders of 40 rural families at a farm in Alta Verapaz. The committee accused the business sector and the government of provoking the violent acts as the families were working at the farm before being evicted by armed groups. The organization has called on public ministry to open an investigation into the armed groups and the owners of the farm in order to avoid an increase in the killings and evictions of rural workers. And Colombia's most southern western province saw funeral services this Monday for the 8 people, including 1 minor, killed in a massacre over the weekend. In a tweet, Governor of Nariño Department, John Rojas, said that an incursion of armed men left 8 people dead and others injured in Samaniego, a village where the local radio host was assassinated last year. According to the governor, the Saturday evening massacre was followed up by the homicide of a minor early Sunday morning. Meanwhile, at least 20 people have been murdered in the last 60 days in the Colombian municipality of Samaniego, while those responsible for the crimes have not been brought to justice. Colombia has seen 3 massacres in the space of just 1 week. Meanwhile, United Nations authorities have reported 33 violent massacres in Colombia so far this year. And Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro held a virtual meeting with leaders of the United Socialist Party of Venezuela on Monday to address strategies ahead of the parliamentary elections to be held in December. President Maduro noted that the slates of candidates for lawmakers and substitutes have been 90% completed. A total of 107 political parties have officially registered to contest the elections. President also announced the creation of an election campaign command named Darío Vives to honor the revolutionary leader who recently passed away. The upcoming parliamentary elections will be the 25th elections held since the Bolivarian Revolution came to power in 1999. And also on Monday, Venezuelan President Maduro highlighted the impunity of Colombian President Iván Duque following the ongoing massacres committed in the country.
Concern yourself, Iván Duque, with the massacre of 5 young people in Cali, or the massacre of 9 young people that took place yesterday. Concern yourself with the massacres of tens of hundreds of human rights activists in Colombia, the massacres in Colombia, or the increase in the COVID-19 pandemic that has led Colombia to reach number 8 in terms of COVID-19 cases and fatalities worldwide. Pay attention, Iván Duque, to the disaster in your country, our beloved Colombia.
And Chilean police forces repressed demonstrators who mobilized to show support for Mapuche spiritual leader Celestino Cordova, who has been on hunger strike for over 100 days. The demonstration, also calling for the release of all Mapuche political prisoners, was held in the Chilean city of Nueva Imperial, where Cordova was admitted to a healthcare institution. Protesters denounced that police forces used rubber bullets and tear gas to violently disperse them. Meanwhile, the Chilean government is expected to deliver an official response to Cordova's latest request that his sentence be commuted to a house arrest. Spokeswomen of the Mapuche leader have noted that he will conduct a dry hunger strike, if his demands are not addressed by the Sebastián Piñera government. And as Celestino Cordova health deteriorated and he's reached 106 days of his hunger strike, a United Nations Human Rights Commission conducted a technical visit to the healthcare facility where he has been admitted in order to obtain information regarding the armed attacks that occurred against the Mapuche community last month. President of Mexico, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, said that the vaccine against COVID-19 is already in the experimental phase.
If Russia or in China, they have the vaccine first and it shows to be effective in saving lives, we immediately will establish communication. I would speak personally with the President of China and with President Putin to have the vaccine.
In other news, children in Haiti returned to school this Monday in the midst of the coronavirus pandemic. The COVID-19 situation in the Caribbean country continues to represent a public health threat. However, authorities have decided to allow schools, including primary education, to resume activities. The country also faces the fact of limited resources to battle the pandemic. According to the United Nations, some 35% of Haitians lack basic drinking water services, and 2/3 have limited or no sanitation services.
Education is the basis of development for all countries. No country can work without education, so it's good that the schools reopen for children and for their future tomorrow.
We'll go now to a short break. Follow us in Twitter at Telesur English and Luis Telesur. We'll be right back. And the 2020 Democratic National Convention kicks off this Monday in the U.S. city of Milwaukee and across the nation as Democrats gather virtually due to the novel coronavirus pandemic. The convention to officially nominate the party's candidates for president and vice president in the upcoming November elections will also see party members from across the country adopt the official 2020 Democratic Party platform. The debates will be broadcast live over the next 4 days from the Wisconsin Center in Milwaukee. Former U.S. Vice President Joe Biden is expected to secure the party's nomination for the electoral campaign. Recent polls show that Biden has an advantage of 12 points among official voters, which represents 43% of the vote. According to the agenda, debates will focus on the economic crisis, racial injustice, and the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Also in the U.S., the expiration of the moratorium on evictions since July 25th keeps thousands of Americans in uncertainty while they demand its extension. While Congress has until 24 August to extend the CARES Act, which prohibits evictions for non-performance of mortgage or debt payments for housing financing, President Donald Trump signed an executive order that sought to extend the moratorium. However, according to analysts, it only contemplates analyzing cases of eventual evictions without actually protecting potential victims of evictions. Civil organizations defending the right to housing and affected citizens of Detroit organized demonstrations calling for that country's justice to act to prohibit evictions in the midst of the pandemic.
We think it's a huge mistake to allow it to end today, and the 36th District Court has shown by its previous actions that it has the power to ban evictions in the city on its own, and it needs to use that power to help the people of Detroit.
And the U.S. administration has finalized a plan to allow oil and gas drilling in Alaska's Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. Presidential candidate Joe Biden has slammed the plan, saying it would cause harm to wildlife, the ecosystem, and the native people as the plan seeks to open the drilling before a potential change in the U.S. Leadership, the 19 million acre refuge, is home to wildlife populations including porcupine, caribou, and polar bears, and has been off limits to drillings for decades. Even when the Trump's decision is set to bring an opportunity for new jobs, the action comes in the midst of the current administration's moves ahead the presidential elections in November, and it also joins other previous reductions in the land area of national parks. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention in the United States have reported a disproportionate infection rate affecting mainly Hispanic and non-white communities. The data was recorded in Utah, and according to the report, workers from those communities accounted for 73% of workplace-associated COVID-19 cases between March 6 and June 5th. Researchers highlighted that one of the reasons of the disparity in the number of cases could be the result of an overrepresentation of non-white and Hispanic workers in occupations that are considered frontline. They also added that those workers have less flexible work hours and fewer remote work options compared with workers who are white. And China's National Intellectual Property Administration announced that it had granted the first invention patent to a domestically developed COVID-19 vaccine. The AD5-nCoV vaccine is co-developed by the Beijing Institute of Biotechnology, CanSino Biologics, biopharmaceutical company, and a team led by Chinese military infectious disease experts Shen Wei. The patent application was filed on March 18th and approved on August 11th. According to a document published on the Intellectual Property Administration website, the vaccine can be mass-produced in a short time in the event of an outbreak. The granting of the patent further confirmed the vaccine's efficacy and safety, the casino company noted in a statement on Sunday. United Nations Children's Fund Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa conducted an official visit to Lebanon this Monday in the wake of the devastating blast in Beirut.
We are committed to continuing to support the children of this country. We estimate that 100,000 children were directly impacted by the blast, but every child in Beirut is affected. We estimate that in greater Beirut area there's around 600,000 children. Working with the schools that have been affected to find alternative placements for children. What is important with the new school year is that 55,000 children who are in those 120 schools have alternative pathways to learning and don't drop out, can continue with their education. UNICEF is appealing for $46.3 million as its contribution to the national response. This involves our support to water and sanitation, to health, to psychosocial support for children, and to education.
And German authorities held talks with representatives of Libya's United Nations recognized government on Monday to address the internal situation across the country.
Even if, for now, the weapons have mostly fallen silent, it is a deceptive calm. Through the flow of arms on both sides from international backers, there remains a great danger of military escalation. We support the UN's main proposal that is first step process the disarmament and demilitarization of the city of Sirte. Libya's UN-recognized government of national accord strongly rejects the mission Irene, which looks good from outside but bad in reality, because as it is right now, it's only towards the unity government not to let her receive any help to counter the aggression, and it does not monitor the export of weapons and mercenary fighters by air and sea and via the Egyptian-Libyan territorial borders.
And we have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. President of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, has noted that new presidential elections could take place in the event that a referendum is held to approve a new constitution. Following a meeting with workers of a truck factory in Belarus capital Minsk, President Lukashenko noted that political power could be redistributed in the country, but only through a due constitutional process and not by force through violent acts on the streets or foreign intervention. President Lukashenko also stressed his commitment to improving the welfare of the Belarusian people, while calling non-protesters to join his work agenda. From Moscow City, our correspondent Lisandra Andres has more details on this.
The president of Belarus, Alexander Lukashenko, admitted on this day that he will be willing to hold new presidential elections in the country on one condition, and that a new constitution be approved in Belarus. The president said that only with an amendment to the constitution to a popular referendum, the country will be willing to hold again presidential elections. But this is not due to the pressure exerted by the opposition's protesters, who for more than a week have been on the streets of the capital and other 10 cities in the country, inciting violent acts and confrontations against law enforcement agents. The president explained that these changes to the constitution, which of course will mean new changes to the power in parliament and other governing bodies in the country, are part of his government program. He had already announced in them he addressed the Assembly of Belarus a few days before the mean date of the voting and just the date of the beginning of the early elections in the country, so the president will be willing to hold new elections. In the meantime, the main opposition candidate of Lukashenko only obtained a little more than 10% from the police station on August 9, and who also left the country within a few hours after the official results were announced by the Central Electoral Commission, and continues from Lithuania to press citizens to continue on the streets to demand changes in power and government and also presidential elections. She has stated that she is willing to organize a government from abroad. Meanwhile, although to a lesser extent, the clashes between the civilian population and the forces of law and order continue. On yesterday, the President Lukashenko held a public address in one of the main squares of the capital, in which more than 65,000 people were added, who are voting of Lukashenko, and also from their supported the president's call on the opposition protesters to cease violence and clashes between law enforcement officials, because they have already left thousands in detentions across the country and also a lot of wounded from both sides. So far, the Interior Ministry reported one deceased.
Thank you, Lisandra Andres, for that report. And the Nigerian army announced the liberation of 11 hostages in the Lakeshore basin. The hostages have been taken by the Boko Haram forces earlier in August from the southeast region of West Kiru. Among the 11 hostages, there were 3 women and 4 children. During the rescue operation, the Nigerian army also seized several weapons and ammunition. The border region between Niger and Nigeria is regularly threatened by Boko Haram and other terrorist groups that carried out hostage-taking for ransom. And thousands of people took to the streets on Monday in Sudan's capital, Khartoum, demanding the transitional government speed up political reforms. Holding flags and banners calling for justice, peace, and reform of the security sector, demonstrators gathered in front of the Sudanese cabinet's headquarters in order to deliver a list of demands, including the formation of a legislative body. The protest took place on the occasion of the first anniversary of the Constitutional Declaration, aimed at establishing a military-civilian coalition to lead a transitional sovereign council, following the overthrow of former Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir in April 2018. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has noted that issues of justice remain one of the most important tasks of his government, together with a modernization of state institutions.
The course of the revolution should be corrected. We are calling the military's presence in the government a clear and specific obstacle. There is nothing called a power-sharing agreement. This is an obstacle on the path of the revolution.
We are out today to continue the struggle to achieve the revolution demands: freedom, peace, and justice. Justice has not been served over the killing of protesters, and they are still free, those who killed them, and not being brought to justice.
And Mozambique assumed the rotating presidency of the Southern African Development Community on Monday, while reaffirming the organization's commitment to fighting terrorism and violent attacks. Likewise, a message of solidarity was also extended to Mauritanian authorities following the recent oil spill that has provoked an environmental disaster.
The Secretariat conducted an assessment of emerging security threats in the region. The findings show that while the security landscape in the SADC region remains stable, there are areas that require strengthening. Proposed recommendations to address the emerging threats were considered by the Organ Troika Summit on 14th August 2020, that is last Friday. In implementing the recommendations, priority will be placed on measures to combat terrorism, violent attacks, and cybercrime. 30, Summit expressed solidarity with the government and the people of Mauritius for the environmental disaster in its waters caused by a grounded ship, and they called upon SADC member states and the international community to support Mauritius in containing the disaster.
The Nigerian government has announced that international flights will resume at both the Lagos and Abuja airports from August 29th. The Minister of Aviation, Siri Kahari, made the announcement on his Twitter account. The minister noted that both the Murtala Muhammad International Airport in Lagos and the Nnamdi Azikiwe International Airport in Abuja would be the first airports to begin their international operations. These two airports were also the first to welcome domestic flights when they restarted. The minister stressed that the applicable protocols and procedures will be announced in due course. On Monday, Israeli artillery attacked two locations north and south of the Gaza Strip, causing serious damage but no casualties. The Israeli artillery station east of Beit Hanun, north of the Gaza Strip, fired 3 shells at a location east of the city, causing damage to the surrounding area and property. The second attack was launched against a location east of the town of Khan Yunis, south of the Gaza Strip, completely destroying it. Israel has recently escalated its attacks on the besieged Gaza Strip, including cutting off fuel supplies, forcing the Gaza power plant to cease operations. And we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories at our website at telesurenglish.net. And you can also join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Luis De Jesus. Thank you for watching. Follow the most important global events through a comprehensive perspective. With a team of journalists in 25 locations around the world to convey our people's reality. From the South